Hello and welcome to the HCA Succession After Show. My name is Will Mavity and I'll be your host for today's episode. Joining me for an in-depth conversation about Succession Season 3, Episode 2 is Sharronda Williams.
Hello.
And Rasha Goel.
Hello, everyone.
So neither of you were going to whistle, I'm sad. I thought maybe we could get a little sing-along of the theme song to really set the mood, but mine's off key. I was hoping someone was better. Before we jump into the conversation, there's a few things you should know about our show. The Succession After Show has spoilers for the current episode and previous episodes in the series. Every week, we're going to be breaking down what happens in each episode and providing our opinions on the episode, our favorite moments, favorite lines of dialogue, and what we expect to happen in next week's episode. So if you're smack dab in the middle of season 1 or season 2, you probably want to skip this one out until you're caught up. And as always, please comment, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of the great content we have. So without further delay, let's get into this week's episode entitled Mass in the Time of War. It's written, just like last week, by Jesse Armstrong and directed by Mark Mylod. So, Mylod, however, no one can ever figure out.
We all messed up his name.
Mark something from Game of Thrones. So in this episode, Kendall, played by Jeremy Strong, tries to get his siblings, as well as Stewie and Sandy, back on his side. Meanwhile, fearing his legal situation, Greg asks his Uncle Ewan for help. So we're going to kind of go through generally just a recap of the episode. So in case you were zoned out and on your laptop, or there's just so much information that follows. Honestly, I need to watch these bad boys twice because there's a lot to keep up with. You can be reminded. So first, we check in with Logan and a couple of his in-house counsel, isolated, eating the world's most sad-looking salad in a hotel in Eastern Europe. Freaking out. He can't get a hold of Shiv, who last week we saw diverting from her previous plans after she learned she wouldn't be CEO. Meanwhile, he checks in on Roman and implies that the appointment of Jerry as CEO might be temporary, and tells Roman that Jerry's just here for now, but he trusts him and that he sees a future for Roman. And like all of the kids, they always seem to buy hook, line, and sinker whenever their dad throws the bare minimum at them in the way of compliments or promises. What do we think of this opening?
I am scared of Logan. When he,
yes.
It's even in the small moment, first I need to issue a public apology to Roman. I know that your name is Roman, not Ronan. I just, if you're out there watching, I just want to let you know that I apologize. But back to Logan, who I'm afraid of, is even the ease of when he calls Shiv doesn't answer, and how he calls Roman, and how he makes, he just seems like a loving dad. Hey, I just want to let you know, no hard feelings about what happened. Had to be Jerry. I trust you. Can you go watch her for me? The way that he makes his kids just gives them just the smallest ounce of love. And it's like they're yearning for it so much and don't even realize it, that they just fall, for the play that he's making. And it scares me. Even with him talking to Connor, it's crazy to see his interactions with all of his children. How even though they all have different types of relationships where they're all strained in some type of way, but all of these kids are still yearning for their father's love while they're still trying to set themselves up in the best possible position, to win in this line of succession. So I just think it's brilliant just how Logan interacts with all his children and plays mind games with them. I'm scared of my own parents now because now I don't know what to believe anymore.
That's so perfectly said, Sharronda. Actually, I feel like that with Logan too. It's all about the mind games. Even though he's a father of these 4 children, at the end of the day, he's constantly looking out for himself. But then that also takes me into his relationship, when you're watching him with his, with his team, his staff, the way he talks to them, they are working their butts off for him, trying to do the best, but he still does not have respect for them. I mean, it's almost like you're walking on eggshells whenever you're working with him, because you're just okay, is this man going to like what I did or is he not? So he definitely terrifies me. And I think too, in the beginning of this episode, we start seeing that whole thing of with that love and the yearning that the children have. Like they're constantly seeking this missing love from their childhood that they never got. And they're just trying to find that somewhere, even if it's within the siblings, which I'm sure we're going to talk about some of the scenes a little bit later. But yeah, you kind of feel sad for them because they're just constantly deprived and they're just waiting for that one nugget and that one, I guess, stamp of approval that dad thinks I'm good. I'm actually good at what I do. But I don't think I'd want to work for Logan or be around him. He scares me.
I don't think rude people though. Like if you're just rude to everyone, if I know that you're just a rude individual, I'm okay with that. I'm scared of the people who know how to play the game and make me feel like they love me, but at the end they're really plotting my demise without me even knowing it. That
the entire cast of Succession, basically.
Basically, yes.
So we hop back to see Kendall. He's trying to pressure poor cousin Greg into reaching out to Uncle Ewan to get him on board and swing his influence on the board. And Greg basically says, you know, I'm not sure how I feel about this. Kendall asks him if he's trying to go Judas on him. Greg basically says he wants to get his own lawyer to cover his butt. Meanwhile, Tom keeps calling him. And as he leaves to go talk to Tom, Sandy and Stewie have a giant papier-mâché Trojan horse wheeled in to the office. And Greg talks with Tom and gives him kind of a hilariously non-committal sign of alliance, basically saying, like, I'm not necessarily involved. Who says those papers came from me? And so I was a little bit surprised that Greg, who I thought was going to be solidly on Kendall's side all season, is definitely wavering and could be more of a wild card than I expected this season. What did you guys make of Greg in general in this episode?
I think Greg's trying to find his way, to be honest with you. You know, we've seen him in this vulnerable position in the last few seasons, and even with the opening of episode 1. And I still think there's that little nervousness in him because he just wants to be the good kid. You know, he just wants to do the right thing, but he doesn't want to get trapped. But I do feel like he's getting some balls. Like there's that one scene when he decides that he wants his own lawyer and he's not just going to take what's handed to him. He's actually going to do some research and figure this out. I feel like he's kind of standing up on his own and trying to figure his way out, but he still has that little vulnerable, sensitive, scared side. So I think he's trying to find that balance, but he knows he wants to protect himself.
Look, they have my man Greg stressed out. I started getting anxiety about how stressed Greg was this entire episode. And I think I think sometimes what Kendall and just as an audience that we have to remember that Greg got brought into this to really help his family out. Like he's not just in this for himself. He's here to try to make sure that the rest of his family is able to be stable going forward. And so I think Greg understands that this is a very messy family and that if they're willing to go at it and create an entire war between their father and the rest of the siblings, that, I mean, he's just a pawn at this point in time. So, I mean, Nicholas Braun is just absolutely fantastic as Greg. When he was like, I'm just too young to be in Congress this many times. Like, this is not something normal for someone my age. So I'm happy that Greg is standing up for himself. I'm happy that he's making sure that his family is going to be protected as well as himself. But I also too wish that Tom would just let my man be, because the way that he was harassing him on the phone this episode, I do miss the interactions between Tom and Greg.
He's going to shoot. What did he say? Logan's going to shoot like a rocket full of spiders down your urethra or something.
Well, he said for Dickie, like that's
yeah.
Like
your Dickie is
Dickie?
Okay.
Write these lines. I was just like, how do you think of this?
Do you like to do your household chores in the nude or whatever?
Yeah.
And I guess we'll keep going with poor Greg. Greg meets with a law student that he met on a dating app or something, and a first semester law student is trying to get legal advice from her. And instead is confronted by a Waystar Royco appointed attorney who's very aggressive and is trying to make sure he's on board. Greg is able to kind of escape that situation and goes to meet with his uncle Ewan, who promises he will bring him an attorney and sets him up with some kind of anti-capitalist attorney who basically informs Greg that Greg is going to be the wedge into Waystar Royco that they're going to try to use and rip the whole thing open and expose, quote unquote, the entire capitalist machine behind it. So Greg, if he was not already in over his head, is very much in over his head.
I think
so. I guess
needs a hug. He needs a hug. He's been through a lot.
He's so tall. Those shots where he's like walking in the Kendall's like 5'10", and Greg is just like.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning too, in the opening, if you see that scene where Kendall's adjusting his tie when he's standing in front of that mirror, it's almost like he's looking up to him. But I love this scene that you mentioned because I think it's so hilarious that this poor girl is there just to hang out with him. And he's literally just going back and forth with like, call your professor. Do you know any advice? And she's just like, I'm in my first semester. And I just think that's hilarious. But that's where he gets the guts, right? That's where I love that he stood up for himself and he said, no, you're not my lawyer. I'll call Jerry. I will figure this out, but I'm not going with you right now. And I like that moment in him because I'm like, oh my God, he's kind of manning up and he's not just going to be sucked in by all this. So that was kind of a fun scene.
And I think it reminds us that Greg didn't grow up the same way that Kendall and everyone else did. Like, he's new to this family. He's new to this way of life. And so even as you see the siblings, when they're talking about how like, no, we knew that the people who work there were like that. Like, this isn't a far-fetched idea. Nicholas is kind of green to all of this that's actually happening around him. So he doesn't have a lawyer and retainer like all of the other siblings actually has.
So true.
So we pop back in and see where some of the other family members are at. Roman is meeting with Jerry, who's clearly enjoying already being CEO. She's taking pictures of the news reports that refer to her as CEO and initially tries to very much assert her power, but becomes conciliatory with Roman and basically agrees to entertain the idea that maybe they can create some kind of leadership council with Roman on board, basically as a way of saying that Logan can't be replaced, and Logan being replaced would really be being replaced by about 6 people. Roman's feeling good, but not certain. Logan also reaches out Connor, as we referenced earlier, and does the same thing. Last time he and Connor had interacted last season, he had just excoriated him on the boat, just humiliated him. And then this time around basically is saying, you're always my firstborn son. I didn't mean what I said on the boat. I have such high hopes for you. And just like all the rest of his members of his family, no matter how much Logan bullies them, Connor basically says, it was pretty rude of you, Dad, but then is immediately obviously interested. But of course, all 3 end up going back towards Kendall's house to kind of see what the waters are like there and really test their options. Also in the process of this, Tom and Shiv have this really weird conversation where she says, I love you, and Tom doesn't. And then she gets concerned when he doesn't say, I love you. And ultimately he agrees to, and then she says, thank you, and hangs up as if the balance of power has gone back to her. So what do you guys make of where Tom and Shiv are at this episode? And where do you think they're going this season?
I mean, that whole conversation is kind of a reverse of what happens when Shiv is talking to Tom as he's, they all have their assignments of what they need to do. And essentially, when she says, I love you, thank you. And so yeah, so essentially it's a reverse of everything that is happening. I mean, Tom and Shiv have been weird for 2 episodes now. I mean, and I like that they're still showing the awkwardness that is happening between both of them, because there was a serious conversation that they had towards the end of season 2 about the state of their marriage, what's going to actually happen in their relationship. And so it seems like they're almost just trying to save face and kind of run away from the issue. Instead of actually coming back to that conversation and dealing with it. So I just love that they're continuously showing the awkwardness of everything that is actually happening each episode. I don't know when it's going to come to a head and where we're just going to have a real conversation about it, but I like the awkwardness that we have so far.
Yeah, I think, their dynamic is so interesting to me. And I feel like at the end of the day, Shiv just feels good knowing that the power is in her hands. And the minute she doesn't see kind of Tom reacting in the way that she expected or wanted, it puts her on the defense to think about, why isn't he kind of following the way I wanted him to? And in this scene, what was interesting for me is I felt like Tom was kind of playing her in a way, but he's also trying to figure out where he really stands. I think he kind of knows that when push comes to shove, like, you guys, he's at the bottom of the totem pole here. I mean, he's the son-in-law. God knows what's going to happen to him. Like, they'll all get themselves protected, but is he really going to be protected if something goes down with Logan and the entire company? So I don't know. Their dynamics have always been very interesting. I feel like deep down in his heart, he does have this true love for her. Like, I don't know if you remember from last season where they were at the beach and she had talked about wanting to explore threesomes and doing different things. And he just came back and was like, no, like, I'm a simple man and I'm in love with you. And this is what I want. So yeah, I want to see how this whole thing unravels by the end of the season and when they're actually going to have a real heart to heart conversation.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see their relationship being super long for this world. It just, I mean, obviously he's already upset by the fact that she's not keeping him appraised of what she's doing in terms of where her alliances are. And I could see a world in which honestly she sticks with Logan and he kind of pushes her she kind of pushes him towards Kendall. So I think that's going to be really interesting. So next, they all come, they meet with Kendall, and Kendall really, I think, reminds us why he is just not CEO material. He gives this big speech about we're the new generation. We are the future. We can like overcome big tech. It's all these just bizarre plans about like we're going to oust Amazon and it's vague platitudes that don't really inspire anyone. And I think make it pretty clear, you see how good Logan is at kind of circling the wagons and getting people back on board. And everything that Kendall says just kind of pushes his family members away throughout the episode. And I thought during this period, Roman got very much the best lines of the episode, just the ways he would kind of make fun of all of Kendall's platitudes. He's like, yeah, I mean, look at us. We're like the next generation of 20-something-year-old, like trans, multiracial, whatever he says, like just making fun of like Kendall's like the quintessential like white liberal. And he's just not inspiring anyone. But they clearly are interested. They discuss among themselves. And then Kendall just does what he always seems to do and manages to insult everyone. He makes a joke about Roman not having sex, and then he calls Shiv the token white liberal. I don't even remember what he says to Connor, but he just doesn't do anything to ingratiate them. He goes off to try and convince Stewie and Sandy that maybe they should be on board. We think they might be. We don't know. And by the time he comes back, pretty much everybody is ready to jump ship and go back to Logan. So do you think really that Kendall is going to keep anyone on board? Do you think he should be CEO? Do you think they were ever willing to and he just fucked it up? What did you guys make of all this?
I mean, Kendall is his own worst enemy. I mean, at the end of the day, and it's outside of, it was what Logan was saying, like, you don't have that fighter instinct. And also, too, sometimes being a fighter is you have to know when to finesse, to bend people to really move in the direction that you need them to. And we see this with him and his siblings. Like, Kendall almost has to, it's almost like he says these things to build himself up and convince him that his thinking is right. But he doesn't have that commanding voice that inspires and engages people to really believe in the vision that Kendall has laid out. And so, I mean, Kendall does what he always does. He fumbles the ball. I mean, we saw this in the beginning of season 1, especially how he spiraled out of control. And I mean, we just saw it again with his own siblings.
I think Kendall is a good team player, but I don't think he has the leadership qualities. So it's like you've got to pick and choose your battles. And you see that with him constantly doing that. Like he's, yeah, you know, he wants the siblings on board with him and he wants them to go against their dad. Yet at the same time, here they are at your home, Kendall, and you are insulting each one of them. Like, I mean, I don't think any of us would want to go to someone's home, whether it's a family member or not, and be insulted and still sit there and have a conversation with this person. So I think but I also think this comes from a reflection of Kendall deep and down being insecure. I feel like there's this huge insecurity in himself because Logan's never really given him that security to let him know that, oh, you know, you can command this ship. So I feel like he's constantly trying to fight that to prove it. But unfortunately, he just doesn't have that skill set as far as the talking. Maybe he has the vision, which I feel like he's still trying to create, but he just doesn't know how to lead the ship.
Yeah, and you know, it keeps going back to Kendall's in this weird place where they all throughout this episode talk about basically it's not just about we want power, we've been enabling something that's bad, we won't do the right thing. And you know, everyone but Shiv admits that to a degree they knew about the sexual assaults going on the cruise ships and just generally the culture, but they enabled it. And I do think there is some part of Kendall that does, in fact, want to do the right thing and doesn't just want power. But at the same time, he's not an honest guy. In theory, he'll say whatever he wants. But it seems like he draws the line at, like, I have to be honest at the weirdest times. Like, he can't, you know, Logan gives everyone the idea that he's going to put them in charge. And Kendall can't seem to lie to his siblings about that. You know,
I want to ask you something really quick because you said something about being honest. What did you guys both think of that scene when Shiv first comes into his house and he's kind of trying to be a reflection to her about, you know, well, I am you and you are me. What did you both think of that? Because I didn't know if he was kind of playing a game with her. Is that his cunning side coming out? Or do you think he really felt that for a moment?
I think he's just full of shit. I think he thinks he's just this fount of wisdom. And he keeps thinking everything he says is inspiring and it's all just ridiculous. Like this thing with his whole, we're going to replace big tech. What does that even mean? He doesn't know what it means, you know? And, you know, he said he kind of spontaneously planned to do what he did at the press conference. And I think he kind of did, you know, he wants to be his dad and be flexible, but he just shoots from the hip and he doesn't plan anything through. I mean, this last 2 episodes have really convinced me he should not be in charge. And basically nothing he said. I mean, he's kind of a joke, and more than someone like Roman, who seems like a joke is. I mean, just because Roman kind of knows he's not hot shit, and Kendall does not.
I think that's why everyone leans towards Shiv, though, because Shiv is like the perfect balance. It's just she's almost too confident. Like she's too confident in what she does, and she doesn't necessarily think, she doesn't know how to, you know how they always say, like, the smartest person never be the smartest person in the room? She thinks that she's the smartest person in the room, and there's no one else that she really needs to seek counsel from. So that's how she ends up hurting herself to begin with. But yeah, it's weird. I felt like we were all, I don't know about you, but I was rooting for Kendall season 1. And now it's just like, I don't know if it's with the murder that happened in season 1, if that's what really sent him off the deep end, but he just seems so different from how we met him at the beginning of the series as a whole.
I was rooting for Kendall at the end of season 2. I thought that was great. You know, he seemed all like his dad's lapdog, and then he was like, hell yeah, you know, he stood up to him. But yeah, he's very much not equipped. I mean, I definitely think it should be Shiv. And so that kind of brings us to the end of the episode. Basically, everybody leaves Kendall and goes back to meet Logan, who has decided to leave Eastern Europe and return to America. And the paparazzi are snapping, a family reunited. He gets in the car with Shiv and promises her that while he can't make her CEO, he wants her to be, quote unquote, the president. A meaningless title, but he says she'll be his eyes and ears on the board, again at the center of this shitstorm, which is covered in human skin and form. It's Jerry Kellman, which suggests that even though it was Logan who decided to make Jerry CEO, there's a power struggle coming there for sure. He doesn't trust her, And clearly, now that he realizes he has Shiv back on board, maybe he is, in fact, grooming her to be the successor. So I guess with that, let's talk about where we see for next week based on where everything has ended from this episode.
I think it's going to be interesting. Oh, go ahead, Sharronda. Go ahead.
Look, this game that Logan is playing with his kids, I don't know. I think Shiv is the obvious choice. And because Shiv is the obvious choice, that she's not going to be the end game for Succession. I honestly don't think that Logan trusts any of his children to take over his company. And I think it's really just the battle of Logan actually, is he going to let the company blow up? Because he doesn't want to honestly relinquish his control, even though we can see that it needs to happen. I don't know. I think it'll be a lot of back and forth of him pitting Shiv and Roman against one another. You know, at the end of the day, even though the kids made the decision that they're going to stick with their dad, someone's going to go over to Kendall's side. I just think that that's how war is. There's many battles that happen and both sides win or lose some. But I don't know. It's just a feeling that I have, even though it's called Succession. I honestly believe that he's not going to give any of the kids his company. I honestly feel as though that all of them might end up losing the company with the shenanigans that they're probably going to have for the rest of the season.
But I don't think he'll stay with Jerry either. So I'm interested to see where it's going to go. I'm not sure if I see any of the siblings going back and teaming up with Kendall, only because in that scene, they were really adamant about, well, at the end of the day, he's our father. No matter what happens, he's our dad. And we don't want to betray him, no matter how much he's hurt us. But I will say with you too, Sharronda, that, man, Logan does play some mind games. I mean, he staged that whole thing of, oh, it's time for family and love, wanting to make sure the press was there when we see Shiv and him meeting in the car. And I still feel, you know, Logan is a snake. He's looking out for himself. So he wants to make sure that his kids are with him, especially with the situation with Kendall. He wants to make sure that he makes them happy. So again, he's throwing those little nuggets. Let me get Shiv on board for right now. I don't know how this is going to go down. I've got Jerry there. I don't think he trusts anyone. I don't think he trusts anyone at all. So, yeah, I don't know if it's going to go to any of the kids, but I don't think it's going to stay with Jerry. And I do want to just throw in, though, I'm interested to see how everything plays out with his wife, because she's definitely not on his side anymore either. And I'm blanking on her name right now.
Marsha.
Marsha. Yeah, like Marsha's pretty pissed with him too right now. So I just feel like he's really, really trying to get whoever he can to be on his side. He doesn't want enemies right now.
Yeah, I think Marsha's definitely an interesting wild card. I mean, she, in exchange for agreeing to act conciliatory with him, she asks him to give her position on the board and a role in the trust. So I think she could be potentially a big factor in accruing a lot more power. I don't think she'd go to Kendall, but I think she's definitely going to be a fly in the ointment. Another person I think is interesting is Uncle Ewan, because he's clearly sick. You know, he said he's getting his affairs in order, and it will be interesting to see if he passes away this season, and if so, if he assigns his seat on the board to Greg or something. I mean, where does that end up being?
That's going to change a lot.
Yeah. So because, you know, he does make it clear he's dying. The lawyer that he's hired is helping him draw up his will, basically. So that's going to be interesting for sure. And also, we saw this interesting shot again of Frank. He's only featured briefly, but he just cuts away when Logan's talking. He's clearly unhappy. He's clearly scowling. And I think, you know, the pieces that Kendall put in motion last week, I do think Frank is going to be the first person to officially defect from Logan's camp to Kendall's. And I think, who knows who comes with him, but I think that could be, you know, a big boost of legitimacy for Kendall to get someone like that who's really had experience with the company and is a little bit more respectable on board.
Can I share something that keeps popping in my head, you guys? Goes back to what Sharronda was saying earlier, the poisoned donut scene.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, for you to have to sit and question that your dad just sent food and that stuff is poison. I was like, whoa, see, that goes back to you can't even trust the people you love. I felt so bad for all of them. I'm like, this sucks.
So, one thing I always love about this show is the dialogue is just delicious. So, Rasha, did you have like a favorite line from this week?
I loved it's snake linguini. When Jerry says that between her and Roman, I was like, oh, those are some sharp cutting words. And I felt like that just says so much. So I'd have to say mine was it's snake linguini.
And then what about you, Sharronda?
I don't know. I mean, it's Greg's delivery of the "I'm too young to like go before Congress again," and then Tom threatening him to send like small spiders down his dicky. So, I mean, it's really a toss up between those two for me.
Yeah, I loved both of those. I liked a lot of what Roman said this week. I liked when he was saying that Shiv was making fucky eyes, I think he said. And
like,
then just as random, like every time he imitated Kendall, he's like, yeah, I does like this voice like, yeah, I'm Kendall, and I'm glad Roman's here, but I actually hate him when I'm mad he didn't bring me anything from the airport. I did bring you something from the airport. I brought you cinnamon buns. I thought it was pretty funny.
I like when he asked to see Jerry's daughters.
Yeah, she's like, don't talk about my daughters. And then I also liked Uncle Ewan is like, oh, I'm putting my affairs in order. And Greg's like, yeah, that's great. He just like clearly doesn't understand what he's saying.
And I like when Shiv calls Kendall a plastic Jesus. It's like, whoa. That's Shiv calling us.
Right?
Oh, I want it to be Tom. I want to hear angry Tom threatening me.
I'm glad you mentioned Tom, though. I'm really curious to see more of Tom and like how he develops in this season, because I feel like he's that good son-in-law. He's always supported them, but like he's feeling like he's kind of getting dicked over a little bit by the family. And again, there is not a trusting place for him. Like he is not still convinced that at the end of all this, if it goes down, he's going to be the first one in jail. So I'm curious to see how this unfolds for him.
Yeah, I think he is probably going to jump ship to Kendall's team with or without Shiv at some point this season. I think he's definitely a vulnerable one. And if he does, I think he'll solidify Greg with Kendall as well, since Greg is wavering. Also, I'm curious. I have no idea what this lawyer that Ewan hired, what kind of wrench that's going to play into there. I mean, I assume they're going to want Greg to be some kind of full-blown whistleblower, which would hurt both sides. So I'm very curious to see what happens there, if Sandy and Stewie try to glom onto that as a way to just push out the entire family or what. I think that's going to be interesting. Besides favorite lines of dialogue, any other favorite individual moments this week?
I think those are mainly my favorites. I mean, I still just think it's chilling how loving that Logan can sound on the phone with his children, even though he's really just playing all of them. I mean, but outside of Logan giving me parental issues and issues with trust, that's about it.
I'm going to say, I like the sibling scene a lot, though. When they go into, I think it's Sophie's room and the four of them are there. Because, I feel like up until now, even with season 1 and 2, we always see them individually or 2 at a time. This was kind of the first time that we saw all 4 of them together in a room, whether they were insulting each other or even, I think there were moments of vulnerability. So I love the way it was shot, first of all. Because you just see these little quick takes of each of them. And even like when Roman is leaving the room, when Shiv is insulting him and stuff. But yeah, I really enjoyed that scene and just kind of the conversation between the 4 of them.
All right. Well, it's been wonderful talking about this with both of you. I thought this was a fantastic episode, and I can't wait to discuss it with both of you next week with Sharronda hosting. So Sharronda, where can we find you?
You can find me on all social media platforms, especially YouTube at Pay or Wait or payyourwait.com.
And Rasha?
You can find me on all social media platforms at Rasha Goel or at rashagoel.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at Mavericks Movies. As always, please subscribe to this channel for more great content like this. And we'll see you next week to enjoy discussing yet another episode of one of the best shows on television with you. So thank you so much for listening.